Beautiful Annie Ross was dragged from her bathtub, sexually assaulted, and strangled to death. Blood from the perpetrator was found at the scene, but at the time, not testable. For over 20 years, the case went cold.
This was one of those cases that haunted every detective. Every potential lead that we had just turned up dry.
Then, two case-changing things happened. In 1996, a young detective took a fresh look at the file, and the following year, DNA testing turned up a profile for an unknown male.
All we had was DNA of an unknown male, and we wanted to put a face to that DNA.
That DNA of the unknown male was entered into CODIS, the National DNA Database, but there were no matches. So who was he? For the next 10 years, Engen and others asked that question, always coming up empty. Then, in 2007, Engen brought Detective Paul Bracciodetta in to work on the city's only unsolved homicide, one that happened 3 years before he was even born.
I said, I want to do this. Let's go.
Together, they set out to talk to every person named in the original investigation. It was going to be a process of elimination, one they hoped would lead to a DNA match.
Myself and Captain Engen started gradually recontacting, preferably friends, associates, co-workers of Annie, and asking if they would be willing to provide a DNA swab to rule them in or out. The vast majority of them did. We had one exception.
That one exception was a doctor Annie had dated off and on. Detectives wanted to know more. To cops, the doctor seemed like he wanted them to know less.
He had a very hard time talking to us. So nervous, in fact, got up 3 times and had to put a hold on the interview. We showed him some photos of Annie when she was alive, and it appeared to us that he was looking at a ghost.
Completely denied knowing anything about Annie, and most importantly, refused to provide a voluntary DNA sample. He later retained an attorney.
What cops did next was straight out of the movies. They started tailing the doctor. While following him, they picked up some discarded trash, took it to the lab and had it tested against the DNA found at the crime scene. But when the results came back, Engen and Bracciodetta were shocked. The DNA was not a match.
When he came back negative and that DNA was not his, we were frustrated. But we quickly regrouped and focused our efforts elsewhere.
Going back to the drawing board, they believed the name of Annie's killer was somewhere in the 3-ring binder of original notes. And around 30 pages in, they found something that would lead them back to Annie's upstairs neighbor.
Page 34 of the original investigation. We found out that, looked into this and realized detectives had talked to a person who lived in that same building that Annie did. This person was extremely nervous. So Detective Bracciodetta and I decided, okay, let's move in this direction.
Move in that direction they did. But after interviewing Annie's neighbor, he was quickly cleared. Luckily, the questioning didn't lead to a total dead end. Cops learned more about the neighbor's friend and frequent couch surfer, Larry Stevens. Larry had lived nearby, but would sometimes stay at the Brookside apartment complex. Cops could place him there around the time of Annie's murder. And shortly after the murder, when Annie's neighbor told Larry the cops wanted to talk to him,
and Larry had replied to him that, I'm not gonna go talk to the cops.
soon after, Larry left town.
What we have here now is a guy who we have tied to the apartment complex. We have a guy here that pretty much said that he does not want to cooperate with the police. And we have a guy that left the area soon after the homicide. Doesn't make him guilty, but it certainly raises our suspicions.
The question was, who was Larry Stevens and why hadn't he been questioned before?
He was on the radar in a very small blip back in 1974, and then there's no follow-up interview with Stephen.
At the time, cops felt he was a fringe character and focused more on those who knew Annie. And as it turned out, Larry Stevens' name had been misspelled in the original police report. The last name spelled with a V instead of a PH. The mistake stalled the current investigation, but once cops knew who they were looking for, they soon interviewed Larry's first wife, Frances Jackson, to learn more.
He seemed like a nice guy, everything was wonderful, and it all started falling apart the day I got a splinter. Larry walks into the bedroom and says, "Where's dinner?" I said, "As soon as I get my splinter out, I will be cooking dinner." Larry didn't want to wait. He clocked me. After that, the relationship kind of went downhill.
After more alleged abuse, Frances left Larry. But leaving came with consequences. Frances says Larry stalked her for the next year and a half.
2-3 times a week, I'd come home from work. He would come out from behind the garage and meet me in the driveway. Well, I would scurry off into the house and lock the door behind me as quick as I could. Every time there was a strange car in my driveway that he did not know, he peeked in my windows to see who I was with.
Frances said the stalking became so frightening, she bought a gun and threatened Larry with it. After that, she never saw him again. But just 7 months later, Annie Ross turned up brutally attacked, sexually assaulted, and murdered.
And then I asked Frances, I said, "Do you think that Larry is capable of murder?" And she looked at me and said, "Absolutely, if he's mad enough."
Coming up, cops wanted to speak with Larry Stevens. Did his alleged obsession for his ex-wife turn into a more violent and convenient downstairs target named Annie Ross?
When I first saw Annie Ross's picture, I took one look at her picture and said, "Oh my God, he's murdered me."
And later, Annie's loyal companion could hold the key to solving her murder.
Really the unsung hero in this whole saga could be this little lone survivor